Welcome in. It is so great to have you sitting down with us today for this deep dive.
Absolutely. Really glad you're here with us.
Yeah. And, if you are joining us right now, you're probably someone who naturally looks a little further down the road than most. You're here to spot those structural shifts in the market.
The underlying tech.
Exactly. The underlying technology before it becomes obvious to the broader public. And that is the exact lens we're applying today.
Right.
We're looking at a single, highly focused piece of source material. It's a brief, but just an incredibly dense text titled Tokenizing the Earth, the Hedera Real Estate Revolution.
It's a bold title.
Very bold. And our mission for this deep dive is to extract and analyze the implications embedded in this text, because the core claim here is essentially a paradigm shift for the world's most historically valuable asset class.
Real estate.
Real estate. For generations, physical property has been treated as the ultimate investment, the absolute bedrock of wealth preservation.
Oh, without a doubt.
But let's be realistic about the historical context here. And you already know this if you track global capital flows at all. For the vast majority of participants, that bedrock has been, it's been structurally locked away behind systemic barriers.
It's the great paradox of modern wealth accumulation, really.
Yeah.
We all understand that real estate is this foundational pillar of financial security. It possesses tangible utility. It provides a hedge against inflation.
Right.
And historically, it appreciates in a reasonably predictable manner. But the ongoing frustration in global markets is that just acknowledging the value of an asset class doesn't inherently grant you access to it.
Definitely not.
The source text we're dissecting today leads with exactly this premise. It identifies that the ultimate investment has been trapped behind two highly entrenched gates: severe illiquidity and massive capital entry costs.
Yeah.
It's a market that was fundamentally engineered for participants who already command substantial capital, leaving retail and even, mid-tier institutional investors largely sidelined.
Forced to just observe the yield generation from a distance. Okay, let's unpack this, because those two gates you just mentioned, illiquidity and entry costs, they aren't just minor inconveniences.
No, not at all.
They are the defining structural features that dictate who actually gets to participate in global wealth generation.
Right.
Let's look at entry costs first. In the traditional model, you don't just allocate a few $100s into a prime commercial building in Manhattan.
Or a logistics hub in Berlin.
Exactly. You need a massive down payment, stringent credit underwriting.
A pristine banking history.
Right. And then, assuming you somehow clear that first hurdle and deploy the capital, you immediately collide with the second gate.
Illiquidity.
Illiquidity.
Yeah.
You have effectively immobilized your capital. You've locked your wealth inside a physical structure. If market conditions shift and you suddenly need to reallocate...
You could just liquidate the third floor conference room.
Right. You can't sell just the lobby. You are forced to divest the entire asset, which triggers this cascading sequence of delays, negotiations, and administrative bloat.
It takes months.
But the source material claims a disruptor has arrived that fundamentally alters this dynamic. The text explicitly names Hedera Hashgraph.
Yes.
And it uses some rather aggressive language here. It doesn't suggest Hedera is just optimizing or, gently modifying the market. It explicitly states Hedera has shattered these traditional barriers.
The word shattered is a deliberate choice by the author, and I think it really warrants scrutiny. When a barrier is shattered, it implies irreversible structural damage to the old model. There's no going back.
Yeah, the old way is just broken.
Exactly. The text argues that Hedera is enabling participants to buy, sell, and earn yield on fractionalized property instantaneously.
Instantaneously.
And that instantaneous nature is what fundamentally rewrites the physics of the real estate market.
Right.
We are examining a transition from a model defined by exclusivity and capital stagnation to one characterized by granular accessibility and high capital velocity.
So it's like, okay, think of it this way. To use an analogy for you listening, fractionalized property is essentially like being able to buy a slice of a pie rather than needing the funds to buy the entire bakery.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. You don't need millions to buy the whole building. You buy a fraction, thereby making the world's most valuable asset class accessible to everyone. But I want to push back on that slightly, though.
Okay, go ahead.
Because for anyone listening who tracks real estate investment trusts, or REITs, the concept of fractionalized property isn't exactly a new invention.
True.
We have had mechanisms to buy fractional shares of real estate portfolios for decades. So what is this text actually claiming is different here? Why does migrating this to Hedera constitute shattering a barrier if I can already open an app on my phone and buy a REIT?
That is the critical distinction to make. With a REIT, you are not actually buying a fraction of a specific tangible property.
Okay.
You are buying equity in a massive corporate entity that manages a largely opaque portfolio of properties.
So I'm buying a company, not a building.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And because of that, you are exposed to corporate overhead, management fees, and the generalized performance of a fund. You don't hold the deed. What the text is outlining with Hedera is direct, verifiable fractional ownership of a specific asset. You aren't buying a share in a corporation. You are holding a digital instrument that directly correlates to a fraction of a specific commercial building.
Or specific parcel of land.
Right. And because it is tokenized, the yield generated by that specific property flows directly to the token holder.
Yeah.
Bypassing the corporate fund structure entirely.
Okay, I see. So it's the difference between owning a share in an agriculture conglomerate versus holding a digital deed to a specific acre of a specific farm.
Yeah.
And getting the direct yield from that one single acre.
Precisely.
And the source text points out that this isn't just some static digital certificate. You are able to trade it and critically earn yield on it instantly.
Yes.
If that specific asset generates rental income, your token dictates that your wallet receives its proportional share of that income, which means the asset class is no longer gated by the size of a participant's initial capital deployment.
What's fascinating here is the underlying mechanical shift that enables this direct ownership model to function at scale.
Break that down for us.
The text moves from the conceptual vision of fractionalization into the specific technological infrastructure. It brings up the migration of title deeds into Hedera's high-throughput consensus layer.
Right, that phrase.
To really grasp the weight of that transition, we have to evaluate what a title deed actually is in the legacy system.
That's a piece of paper.
It is the ultimate manifestation of market friction, a physical document heavily centralized, guarded by a local municipality.
Tucked away in some filing cabinet in a county clerk's office.
Exactly. And it requires manual human verification at every single step of the transfer.
So migrating that proof of ownership onto a decentralized consensus layer is what takes this whole fractional liquidity thing from a cool theoretical concept to an actual executing reality.
It proves it's not just a future promise, it's an immediate reality.
Okay, let's drill into that specific phrasing from the text. High throughput consensus layer. Because as the proxy for the listener here, I want to make sure we aren't getting bogged down in jargon.
Fair enough.
For our listeners who are familiar with the broader space, the text seems to be pointing directly to Hedera's specific architectural capability.
It is.
Legacy systems have historically struggled to handle massive transaction volumes without either bottlenecking the network or causing transaction fees to absolutely skyrocket.
Right, the classic trilemma.
Exactly. And if you are trying to micro-distribute daily rental yield to, say, 10,000 fractional owners of a skyscraper,
A network with high fees would instantly collapse the economic viability of the model.
the transaction fees would just eat the rent.
They would cannibalize the yield completely. That's why the text specifically highlights the high-throughput nature of Hedera. Real estate tokenization at a global scale requires an industrial-grade engine.
It has to be fast and cheap.
It needs to process thousands of microtransactions, ownership transfers, and yield distributions per second, with absolute finality and at a predictable microscopic cost.
So this high-throughput consensus layer is essentially the engine that proves fractional liquidity actually works.
Exactly. The consensus layer is the mathematical agreement engine that proves ownership without requiring a centralized human authority to audit the ledger.
Wow.
And that technological reality brings us to perhaps the most disruptive assertion in the entire source text. The phrase, code replaces middlemen.
Okay, yes. I hear a phrase like code replaces middlemen, and while it sounds incredibly efficient from a capital perspective, it also sounds, well, a bit ruthless.
It does.
If we look at the legacy property markets, they are entirely defined by their intermediaries. We are talking about brokers,
Escrow agents,
title companies, specialized real estate attorneys.
correspondent banks.
Exactly, armies of people. If this consensus layer is removing those entities, does the text suggest the code is actually absorbing the legal and fiduciary weight of all those professionals?
It's not necessarily that the code is practicing law. Rather, the code is eliminating the administrative ambiguity that those professionals historically existed to manage.
Okay, give me an example.
Think about an escrow agent. Their primary function is to serve as a neutral third party, holding funds until specific pre-agreed conditions are met.
Because the buyer and seller cannot trust each other.
Exactly. They exist entirely to bridge a trust deficit. What the text is arguing is that a smart contract on Hedera inherently resolves that trust deficit.
Because it's hard-coded.
Right. The code mathematically guarantees that the asset will only transfer when the capital is verified and delivered. The execution is autonomous and atomic. Both happen at the exact same time, or neither happens.
So the middlemen aren't being replaced by robot lawyers.
No.
They are being rendered obsolete because the structural friction they use to manage simply no longer exists.
Yes. The friction of legacy property markets is fundamentally dismantled within a high-throughput consensus layer.
That makes total sense. The toll booths are being dismantled. You aren't paying a title company to spend 3 weeks manually verifying paper records because the consensus layer already possesses the cryptographically verified truth of ownership.
Exactly.
It compresses a settlement process that traditionally takes 90 days into a process that takes 3 seconds. And it does so without extracting a massive 3 or 6% cut of the total transaction value.
Which unlocks an immense amount of what economists call dead capital.
Dead capital.
When an asset is trapped in a 90-day closing process, the capital tied up in that transaction is completely unproductive. It's doing nothing.
By collapsing the settlement window to seconds, Hedera is dramatically increasing the velocity of capital within the real estate market.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this acceleration leads to a profound physical-to-digital convergence in the text. It does.
The author discusses the transformation of stagnant brick-and-mortar assets. Think about the literal nature of a physical building. It is the ultimate stagnant asset.
It's geographically bound.
Physically heavy and completely immobile. But the text asserts that this technological shift fundamentally alters the nature of the asset itself, transforming these physical buildings into something entirely new.
Programmable, hyperliquid digital instruments.
Yes, let's dissect that phrase for the listener. Programmable, hyperliquid digital instruments. How does making a physical building programmable and hyperliquid fundamentally change how we interact with the physical world?
That transformation is the true core of the Hedera real estate revolution. Let's isolate those two adjectives, programmable and hyperliquid.
Okay.
To state that a physical building is now programmable means that the economic logic governing its ownership, its transfer restrictions, and its yield distribution are hard-coded into the asset itself. Consider the administrative burden of property management today. If a commercial property generates lease revenue, a traditional property manager collects it.
They deduct expenses,
Run accounting software.
and then manually issue monthly or quarterly dividends to the owners.
It's painfully slow. A programmable digital instrument on Hedera can be coded to automatically stream that rental yield to token holders on a daily or even hourly basis,
Hourly rent collection.
proportional to their exact fractional holding at that specific second in time.
The compounding implications of that are just staggering. If you, as an investor, are receiving your yield daily via a smart contract, rather than waiting for a quarterly distribution check, your ability to reinvest and compound that capital accelerates dramatically.
Significantly.
You are shifting from an analog payout schedule to a digital continuous stream of value. And that perfectly sets up the second adjective the text uses.
Hyperliquid.
Hyperliquid.
Right. We established earlier that illiquidity is the defining curse of traditional real estate. But when you tokenize the title deed and migrate it to Hedera, the asset sheds that illiquidity premium. It becomes hyperliquid.
Because it's a token on a ledger.
Yes, you can trade your fractional token, representing a piece of a data center in Texas, on a digital marketplace, with the exact same friction and speed as trading a blue-chip stock.
Or sending a text message.
Exactly. The underlying physical asset remains entirely stationary. The data center isn't moving. But the ownership layer, the capital representation of that asset, flows globally without friction.
If we look at the legacy market, the idea of selling a real estate asset over a weekend or at 2 in the morning is structurally impossible.
The markets are closed.
The banks are closed, the title offices are closed.
Everyone's asleep.
Right. But a hyperliquid digital instrument on a consensus layer operates 24/7/365. The friction is entirely abstracted away.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this abstraction of friction leads directly into the concluding thesis of our source text.
Which is,
The author posits that the shattering of these entry barriers, the shift to code-driven escrow, and the creation of programmable assets are all culminating in the establishment of a globalized financial frontier.
A globalized financial frontier.
And the word frontier is crucial here. A frontier represents an uncharted territory that operates outside the jurisdictional constraints of the legacy system.
Because in the traditional property market, your investment thesis is almost entirely dictated by your geographic location.
Your local fiat currency.
And your domestic banking regulations.
Silos are massive.
Yeah, if you are a retail investor sitting in London, the logistical nightmare of attempting to purchase a fractional share of a commercial warehouse in Singapore is basically insurmountable.
You have to navigate cross-border capital controls,
Currency exchange risk.
foreign tax jurisdictions.
And you have to rely on the SWIFT banking network to eventually clear the funds. You are locked out by national borders just as severely as you are locked out by the initial entry costs.
That is the exact geopolitical friction the text implies is being dismantled. On a globalized financial frontier, powered by a high-throughput consensus layer, geographic borders lose their economic friction.
They just don't matter to the code.
Exactly. Because the asset is a programmable digital instrument, an investor in one hemisphere can seamlessly and instantly acquire a tokenized fraction of an asset in another hemisphere.
It's borderless.
The underlying code of the HBAR network does not recognize national borders. It doesn't observe regional banking holidays, and it does not require a localized correspondent bank to clear the transaction.
It effectively creates a unified global liquidity pool.
Where anyone with network access can participate in the value creation of the Earth's real estate. It takes a highly localized, siloed asset class and democratizes it on a planetary scale.
So what does this all mean if we synthesize the core takeaways we have extracted from the text today? The takeaway for you, the listener, is a fundamental recalibration of how value is stored and transferred. The central premise that real estate is the ultimate yet completely inaccessible investment is no longer a permanent economic reality.
The historical gates of illiquidity and massive capital requirements have been actively shattered.
Shattered by the architecture of Hedera Hashgraph. The administrative friction and the costly middlemen that defined legacy property markets are being systematically replaced by autonomous code.
Friction is gone.
We are watching stagnant, immovable brick-and-mortar assets be fundamentally transformed into programmable, hyper-liquid digital instruments.
Available to anyone.
Exactly. You don't need millions in upfront capital, and you don't need a localized fleet of attorneys and brokers. You simply need access to the decentralized network.
It really forces us to reevaluate our assumptions about market design. We're analyzing the sheer scale of a transition from an analog legacy market, one entirely dependent on human intermediaries, physical documentation, and exclusionary capital moats, to a completely code-driven, frictionless global ecosystem. This is not a marginal optimization of the existing real estate market. It is the total replacement of its foundational architecture.
Wow.
It proves that the limitations we accepted for centuries regarding how we trade, hold, and extract value from physical property were not inherent economic law.
They were just technological limitations.
Exactly, limitations of the era. And according to the text, those limitations have now been decisively solved.
And as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final, slightly more provocative thought to analyze on your own. We have spent this time breaking down the mechanics of how this technology makes property hyper-liquid and globally accessible. But consider the deeper philosophical shift regarding human ownership.
Right.
If the stagnant physical land, the very ground beneath our feet, can suddenly become a hyper-liquid, borderless digital instrument governed entirely by autonomous, decentralized code, how will this eventually change our fundamental human understanding of what it means to own a piece of the earth?
That is the big question.
It is a massive structural question, and it is the reality we are all going to be navigating moving forward. Thank you so much for sitting down and joining us for this deep dive. We will catch you next time.